My name is Harold, and I'm 67 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in this small room at Sunset Manor Nursing Home, staring out the window at a parking lot where my son Michael dropped me off 3 months ago. For 40 years, I worked double shifts as a mechanic and night security guard to give that boy everything he needed. I raised him alone after his mother passed when he was just 8. I sacrificed my youth, my back, my dreams, all for him. But what my son Michael and his wife didn't know was that while they were busy planning how to spend my money, I was preparing a little surprise of my own. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about life's unexpected turns. Trust me, what happened next will make you think twice about how you treat the people who love you most. Now let me tell you how a father's love turned into the sweetest justice I've ever witnessed. Looking back, I can still remember the day Michael was born like it was yesterday. Sarah, my beautiful wife, held him in her arms and whispered, "Harold, promise me you'll always take care of our boy." I made that promise, and God knows I kept it. Even after cancer took her away when Michael was just 8 years old. Those early years were the hardest of my life. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to get Michael ready for school, pack his lunch with extra cookies, because I knew he shared them with kids who didn't have enough. Then I'd drop him off and head to Johnson's auto shop where I'd work on engines until 6. After a quick dinner with my boy, helping him with homework and tucking him into bed, I'd put on my security uniform and guard the warehouse district until dawn. 4 hours of sleep was all I managed most nights, but seeing Michael's report cards made every sleepless hour worth it. I remember teaching him to drive in my old Chevrolet Silverado when he turned 16. His hands shook on the steering wheel, and he stalled the engine 5 times before we made it out of the driveway. "Dad, I'm never going to get this," he said, frustrated tears in his eyes. I put my weathered hand on his shoulder and said, "Son, nothing worth doing comes easy. Your mother would be so proud watching you grow up." By the end of that summer, he was driving like he'd been born behind the wheel. The weekends were our special time. We'd go fishing at Miller's Pond, just the two of us with our tackle box and a cooler full of sandwiches. Michael would tell me about school, his friends, his dreams of becoming an engineer. "I'm going to build bridges, Dad, big ones that last forever." I'd listen to every word, storing them in my heart like precious treasures. When Michael graduated high school as valedictorian, I cried harder than I had since Sarah's funeral. All those years of sacrifice, all those double shifts, had led to this moment. He got a full scholarship to State University for engineering, and I couldn't have been prouder. During his college years, I'd send him care packages with his favorite cookies and enough money for pizza with his friends, even though it meant I ate soup and crackers for dinner most nights. After graduation, Michael landed a job at a prestigious firm in the city. That's where he met Jennifer, a sharp-dressed woman from a wealthy family who seemed to have very specific ideas about how life should be lived. Their wedding was beautiful, though I noticed Jennifer's parents barely acknowledged my presence. She was polite enough to me, but there was something cold in her eyes whenever we spoke, like she was calculating something I couldn't quite understand. When they bought their first house, a modern suburban palace with granite countertops and a 3-car garage, I was thrilled. Finally, my son had achieved the American dream I'd worked so hard to give him. I imagined holidays there, maybe a grandchild running around the perfectly manicured lawn. I'd even started building a cradle in my garage workshop, just in case. My own house, the one I'd built with my own hands over 30 years ago, sat on 2 acres outside town. It wasn't fancy, but every board, every nail, every coat of paint represented love and hard work. The back garden where Sarah used to grow tomatoes still bloomed every summer, tended by these old hands that remembered her gentle instructions. That house held our entire life together, and I always assumed Michael would want to preserve it, maybe even live there someday with his own family. But as the months passed after his wedding, something started to change in my son's voice during our phone calls. Where once he'd eagerly share stories about work and ask about my garden, now our conversations grew shorter, more distant. Jennifer was always in the background with some urgent matter that needed his attention. "Dad, I've got to go," became his favorite phrase, usually followed by a quick "love you" that felt more like obligation than affection. The first real sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening in October. I'd called Michael to tell him about the apple tree in the backyard, how it had produced the biggest harvest in years, just like the ones his mother used to make into pies. Instead of the excitement I expected, there was silence on the other end of the line. "That's nice, Dad," he said flatly. In the background, I could hear Jennifer's voice, sharp and insistent, though I couldn't make out the words. "Listen, I really can't talk right now. We're looking at some important documents." Important documents. Those words stuck in my mind long after we hung up. What kind of documents required such urgency on a quiet Tuesday evening? But I pushed the thought away, telling myself that successful people like Michael and Jennifer always had business to attend to. The visits became less frequent, too. Where Michael used to stop by every Sunday after church, now weeks would pass without seeing him. When I'd call to ask if everything was okay, Jennifer would answer with perfectly crafted excuses. "Oh, Harold, Michael's been so busy with the Henderson project. You know how dedicated he is to his work?" Her voice carried a sweetness that somehow felt more bitter than honey. The first time I fell was in November, just a stupid slip while changing a light bulb in the kitchen. Nothing serious, just a bruised hip and wounded pride. But when I called Michael to let him know, Jennifer answered again. "Harold, you really need to be more careful at your age. Maybe it's time to consider some changes." Changes. Another one of those loaded words that seemed to carry more weight than their simple letters suggested. By December, the isolation was getting to me. The house felt bigger and quieter without regular visits from my son. I'd find myself talking to Sarah's photograph on the mantel, telling her about my day, asking her advice like I used to when she was alive. "What's happening to our boy, honey?" I'd whisper to her smiling face. "He's becoming someone I don't recognize." That's when I made the mistake of suggesting that maybe I could move in with them, or they could move in with me. "Dad, that's not really practical," Michael said when I brought it up during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "Jennifer and I need our space. You understand, right? Besides, you're doing fine on your own." But I wasn't fine on my own. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a prison. The garden that had given me so much joy seemed overwhelming. Simple tasks like groceries and doctor's appointments became monumental challenges. Yet, every time I tried to express these feelings to Michael, Jennifer's influence seemed to guide his responses toward independence and self-reliance. The breaking point came during Christmas dinner. I'd prepared all of Michael's favorite dishes, the same ones I'd been making since he was a boy. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green bean casserole, and apple pie made from the fruit of that blessed tree. They arrived 2 hours late, Jennifer checking her phone constantly while Michael seemed uncomfortable in his own childhood home. "Dad, we can't stay long," he announced before we'd even finished eating. "Jennifer's parents are expecting us for dessert." Her parents, who lived in their mansion across town, surrounded by their country club friends and crystal stemware. I watched my son's face as he spoke, searching for any trace of the boy who used to beg for just 5 more minutes when bedtime came. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man whose priorities had shifted like sand in an hourglass. After they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the barely touched plates of food I'd spent all day preparing. That's when I heard it. Sarah's voice as clear as if she were sitting right beside me. "Harold, our son is lost, but he's not gone forever. Sometimes people need to learn the hard way what really matters." The incident that changed everything happened on a cold February morning. I was getting out of the shower when my feet slipped on the wet bathroom floor. The fall itself wasn't terrible, but something in my lower back twisted wrong, sending lightning bolts of pain down my legs. I lay there on the cold tiles for what felt like hours, unable to get up, watching steam from the hot shower slowly fog the mirror where Sarah used to do her makeup every morning. When the paramedics finally arrived, thanks to my neighbor Patricia hearing my calls for help, they found me confused and shaken. The emergency room doctor, a kind woman named Drive Martinez, explained that, while nothing was broken, the fall had aggravated some existing arthritis in my spine. "You're going to need some help for a few weeks while you recover," she said gently. "Do you have family who can assist you?" I called Michael from the hospital, and for the first time in months, he sounded genuinely concerned. "Dad, are you okay? We'll be right there." When he arrived with Jennifer, I saw something flicker in his eyes that reminded me of the boy who used to worry when I came home late from work. But Jennifer's expression was different. calculating like she was already 3 steps ahead in a game I didn't know we were playing. "Harold, this is exactly what we've been worried about," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You can't keep living alone in that big house. What if Patricia hadn't heard you? What if you'd been lying there for days?" Her questions felt like arrows, each one hitting its mark with surgical precision. Over the next few days, as I recovered at home with the help of a temporary visiting nurse, I started noticing phone calls that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. Hushed conversations between Michael and Jennifer that ceased the moment they saw me approaching. Documents spread across my kitchen table that were quickly shuffled away when I asked what they were reviewing. The visiting nurse, a cheerful woman named Carmen, mentioned during one of her visits that someone had called asking about my mental capacity and whether I was competent to make decisions about my living situation. When I asked who had made such a call, she seemed uncomfortable and changed the subject. But the seed of suspicion was planted, growing in the fertile soil of my increasingly isolated existence. One afternoon, while pretending to nap in my recliner, I overheard a phone conversation that chilled me to the bone. Jennifer was in the kitchen, speaking in low tones to someone on her cell phone. "The house is probably worth at least $400,000, and it's completely paid off," she whispered. "Plus, there's the truck, and whatever else he's got saved up. We just need to find the right facility and make sure all the paperwork is in order." My heart pounded so hard I was sure she could hear it from the next room. Facility, paperwork. The pieces of a horrible puzzle were beginning to form a picture I didn't want to see, but I forced myself to keep listening, to understand the full scope of what was being planned for my life without my consent. "Michael feels guilty about it, but I keep telling him it's for his father's own good," Jennifer continued. "He can't take care of himself anymore, and we certainly can't be expected to drop everything and become full-time caregivers. Harold had his time to live his life. Now it's our turn." The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she discussed my future like I was a problem to be solved, rather than a human being with feelings and rights, hit me harder than any physical blow I'd ever endured. This was the woman my son had chosen, the woman whose values had apparently become his own, the woman who saw my 4 decades of sacrifice as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. That night, I called Michael directly, bypassing Jennifer entirely. "Son, we need to talk about this situation. I'm feeling better, and I think I can manage just fine with a little help from neighbors and maybe a weekly cleaning service." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. "Dad," he finally said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't identify. "Jennifer and I have been talking, and we think it might be time to explore some other options. Just temporarily, until you're completely back on your feet." Other options. The euphemisms kept piling up like snow in a blizzard, each one making it harder to see the truth beneath. The morning they came to take me away is burned into my memory like a brand on cattle. Michael arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression I'd only seen at Sarah's funeral. Jennifer stayed in their luxury SUV, engine running, checking her phone with the same urgency she'd shown at every family gathering for the past 2 years. "Dad, we need to discuss your living situation," Michael said, settling himself at my kitchen table like he was conducting a business meeting. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers that looked official and intimidating. "We found a really nice place called Sunset Manor. It's just temporary. Just until you're completely recovered and ready to be independent again." The words washed over me like ice water. Temporary. Independent. The same lies wrapped in different packaging, delivered by the son I'd raised to be honest and honorable. I looked at his face, searching for any sign of the boy who used to promise me he'd take care of me when I got old, the same way I'd taken care of him when he was young. "Michael, I don't need to go anywhere," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm doing fine here. This is my home. This is where your mother and I built our life together." I gestured around the kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd celebrated every milestone of his growing up. But his expression remained unchanged, professionally sympathetic but ultimately unmovable. "Dad, the doctor said you need supervision. What if you fall again? What if something worse happens? Jennifer and I can't be here 24/7. And you can't expect the neighbors to take care of you forever." Jennifer and I. When had my son started thinking of himself as half of that equation instead of as my son first? When had her priorities become more important than the man who'd given him everything? I wanted to ask these questions, but something in his demeanor told me the answers would only break my heart further. "The car is waiting, Dad," Michael said, checking his expensive watch. "We really need to get going. They're expecting you for lunch, and I want to make sure you're settled in before I have to get back to work." Work. Always work. The eternal excuse that had replaced family time, the shield behind which he could hide his guilt. The drive to Sunset Manor passed in a blur of suburban landscapes and uncomfortable silence. Michael made small talk about the weather in his latest project, carefully avoiding any mention of how long I'd be staying or when I might be able to return home. Jennifer remained focused on her phone, occasionally making soft sounds of amusement at whatever social media drama was unfolding on her screen. Sunset Manor looked like every nursing home in every movie I'd ever seen. Beige walls, institutional furniture, the smell of disinfectant trying unsuccessfully to mask other, less pleasant odors. The staff was friendly enough, but their smiles carried the practiced warmth of people who dealt with confused, abandoned elderly people every single day. "This is just temporary, right?" I asked Michael one more time as we stood in the small room that was supposed to become my world. A narrow bed, a single dresser. A window that looked out onto the parking lot where families dropped off their inconvenient relatives. "Of course, Dad," he said. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just until you're back on your feet completely." He hugged me quickly, the kind of embrace you give to distant relatives at reunions, and then he was gone, leaving me standing in that sterile room with my one suitcase of belongings and a heart full of disbelief. That first night, lying in the narrow bed and listening to the sounds of institutional life around me, I tried to process what had just happened. My son, the boy I'd raised with love and sacrifice, had just deposited me in a nursing home like I was a piece of furniture he no longer had room for. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain I'd ever experienced, but the worst was yet to come. 3 days later, when I called home to check on things, a stranger answered my phone. "Hello," the unfamiliar voice said. "Who is this?" "This is Harold Morrison," I said, confusion making my voice shake. "This is my house. Who are you?" There was a pause, then the sound of muffled conversation. "Oh, you must be the previous owner," the voice said with dawning understanding. "We just moved in yesterday. The realtor said the house had been vacant for a while." The phone slipped from my trembling fingers. Previous owner. Vacant. The words echoed in my head like gunshots. While I'd been adjusting to life at Sunset Manor, believing I'd be going home soon, my son had sold my house, my sanctuary, my life, without even telling me. Everything Sarah and I had built together, every memory those walls contained, had been traded away like stock certificates. I called Michael immediately, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. "How could you sell my house without telling me?" I demanded when he finally answered. "That was my home, Michael. That was where your mother lived, where you grew up. How could you do this to me?" His explanation came in the same professional tone he'd used when dropping me off. "Dad, you're not coming back there. We talked about this. You need care now, and the house was just sitting empty. The money from the sale will help pay for your expenses at Sunset Manor." My expenses. As if I were a monthly bill to be managed rather than his father. I wanted to scream, to demand he bring me home immediately, but the crushing realization hit me that I no longer had a home to return to. My son had made that decision for me, without my consent, without even the courtesy of a conversation. "What about my truck?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We sold that too, Dad. You don't need it anymore." And just like that, with a few sentences delivered in a voice that could have been discussing the weather, my son had erased my entire independent existence. No home, no vehicle, no choice in where I lived or how I spent my remaining years. I was now completely dependent on the mercy of the institution he'd chosen for me, funded by the sale of everything I'd worked my entire life to build. The first week at Sunset Manor was the darkest period of my entire life. I'd lie awake at night in that narrow bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and trying to understand how my life had come to this point. 67 years of hard work, of sacrifice, of love, had led to abandonment in a place that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. During the day, I'd sit by the window in the common room, watching cars come and go in the parking lot, hoping against hope that one of them would bring Michael to take me home. But days turned into weeks, and the only visitors I received were social workers checking on my adjustment and medical staff monitoring my blood pressure, which had skyrocketed since my arrival. The other residents were kind enough, but most were dealing with their own versions of family abandonment and failing health. There was Gladys, whose daughter lived 3 miles away but hadn't visited in 6 months. Robert, whose son promised every week to take him to lunch but never showed up. We were a collection of discarded parents, warehoused by children who'd grown too busy or too selfish to honor the people who'd given them life. But after that first terrible week, something began to shift in my thinking. The shock and grief started transforming into something sharper, more focused. Anger, yes, but also a kind of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. My son thought he'd won some kind of game by disposing of me so efficiently. He and Jennifer were probably celebrating their cleverness, congratulating themselves on solving the Harold problem, while cashing in on my life's work. What they didn't know, what they'd been too greedy to discover, was that the house and truck weren't my only assets. For 35 years, I'd been faithfully contributing to a savings account that Sarah had insisted we keep for emergencies. Even after her death, I'd continued adding to it, sometimes just $20 or $30 from each paycheck, but consistently, relentlessly, like water wearing away stone. That account, held at a small credit union across town, contained nearly $200,000. Michael had no idea it existed because I'd never mentioned it, preferring to let him think I was just getting by on my pension and Social Security. It was my security blanket, my insurance against exactly the kind of crisis I now found myself facing. On my 10th day at Sunset Manor, I made my first move. Using the payphone in the lobby during the afternoon activity hour, I called Benjamin Watts, a lawyer who'd handled Sarah's estate, and had always told me to call if I ever needed anything. His secretary remembered me and put me through immediately. "Harold, I was so sorry to hear about your situation," Benjamin said when I explained where I was calling from. "Your son didn't mention you'd be moving to Sunset Manor when he came in to handle the house sale." My blood ran cold. "Michael came to see you about the house?" "Well, yes, he had power of attorney papers and said you'd asked him to handle the sale because of your health issues." "I assumed you were aware." Benjamin's voice trailed off as he realized the truth of the situation. Power of attorney. Another piece of paper Michael had probably slipped into that stack of temporary documents I'd signed without reading carefully. In my trust and confusion, I'd given my son the legal right to control my entire life, and he'd used that power to eliminate me as efficiently as a business rival. "Benjamin," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks, "I need to see you as soon as possible, and I need to make some changes to my will." The satisfaction in his voice was unmistakable. "I'll be there tomorrow morning, Harold. And don't worry about the fees. Some cases are about more than money." That night, for the first time since arriving at Sunset Manor, I slept peacefully. My son thought he'd checkmated me, but he'd forgotten that the man who'd taught him chess was still capable of thinking several moves ahead. Michael and Jennifer were about to learn that betraying the person who loved you most comes with consequences they'd never imagined. The next morning, Benjamin arrived with his briefcase and a tape recorder. We sat in a small conference room while I told him the entire story, from Michael's gradual coldness to the secret phone conversations to the day I was deposited at Sunset Manor like unwanted baggage. Benjamin took notes and nodded grimly as I spoke. "Harold, what they did to you is unconscionable," he said when I finished. "But legally, with that power of attorney, most of it was technically within their rights. However, there are still some things you can control, some decisions that remain entirely yours to make." He explained that while Michael had gained control over my existing assets through the power of attorney, he had no knowledge of or legal claim to the savings account I'd maintained independently. That money, along with my pension and Social Security, remained mine to distribute as I saw fit. More importantly, my will was still mine to change, regardless of any other legal documents I'd signed. "What do you want to do, Harold?" Benjamin asked, his pen poised over a legal pad. I looked out the conference room window at the parking lot where my son had abandoned me, then back at the lawyer who was offering me a chance at justice. "I want to make sure Michael learns the true cost of greed," I said, "and I want to make sure some good comes out of this betrayal." Over the next hour, we crafted a new will that would have made Sarah proud. The savings account, along with my remaining pension benefits, would be donated to a local charity that helped elderly people remain in their homes with dignity. Michael, who'd been so eager to claim his inheritance early, would receive exactly what he deserved. Nothing but the knowledge that his greed had cost him everything. But the new will was just the beginning. I also instructed Benjamin to liquidate the savings account and establish a foundation in Sarah's name, dedicated to helping families avoid the kind of elder abuse I'd experienced. The irony was perfect. Michael's betrayal would fund efforts to prevent other children from following his example. As Benjamin packed up his papers, he shook my hand with genuine warmth. "Harold, I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I can tell you that justice isn't always about money. Sometimes it's about making sure people face the consequences of their choices. Your son is about to get an education in both." The confrontation I'd been planning came 3 weeks later, on a rainy Thursday afternoon in April. I'd called Michael that morning, telling him I had something important to discuss and asking him to come to Sunset Manor as soon as possible. For the first time since he'd abandoned me there, urgency crept into his voice. "Dad, are you okay? Are you sick?" The concern sounded genuine, which made what I was about to do both easier and harder at the same time. "Just come, Michael," I said. "And bring Jennifer. This involves both of you." They arrived within an hour, Jennifer looking annoyed at being pulled away from whatever social engagement she'd been planning. Michael appeared genuinely worried, which told me that despite everything, some small part of my son still cared about his father. That knowledge made what I was about to do feel like justice rather than revenge. We sat in the same conference room where Benjamin and I had rewritten my future. Michael fidgeted with his car keys while Jennifer checked her phone with her usual distracted air. Neither of them seemed to understand that they were about to face the consequences of choices they thought were consequence-free. "Michael," I began, my voice calmer than I'd felt in months. "Do you remember what you promised me at your mother's funeral?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "Dad, I don't really remember everything from that day. It was emotional for all of us." "You promised me that I'd never be alone," I continued, watching his face carefully. "You promised that you'd take care of me the way I'd taken care of you. Do you remember that promise now?" Jennifer rolled her eyes with theatrical exaggeration. "Harold, that was years ago. People say things when they're grieving. You can't hold Michael responsible for every emotional statement he made at his mother's funeral." The casual dismissal of my son's sacred promise, delivered with the same tone she might use to discuss a minor scheduling conflict, crystallized everything I'd come to understand about this woman's influence on my family. She'd turned my son into someone who could break the most important promises without guilt or consequence. "You're right, Jennifer," I said, my voice steady and clear. "People do say things when they're emotional. But some people also do things when they think no one is watching. Things like selling their father's house without permission. Things like stealing everything a man worked for and then abandoning him in a nursing home." Michael's face went pale. "Dad, we didn't steal anything. We used the power of attorney you gave us to handle your affairs. Everything we did was legal." "Legal, yes," I agreed. "But not honest. Not honorable. Not what a son does to the father who sacrificed everything for him." I pulled out a folder that Benjamin had prepared for me, filled with documents that would change their lives forever. "But I didn't ask you here to discuss the past. I ask you here to discuss the future." Jennifer leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with what I now recognized as greed. "Harold, if this is about money for the nursing home, we've already set aside funds from the house sale. You don't need to worry about expenses." The assumption that I was asking for their charity, that I was dependent on their generosity for my basic care, sparked an anger so pure it felt cleansing. "This isn't about asking for anything from you," I said. "This is about telling you what you've lost." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "Michael, do you remember helping me open my first bank account when you were 12 years old? You were so excited to see how savings accounts worked, how money could grow over time if you were patient and disciplined." His nod was cautious, uncertain where this conversation was heading. "For 35 years I've been putting money into a savings account that you didn't know about. Not much at first, just a few dollars here and there. But over time, with compound interest and careful management, it grew into something substantial." I slid the bank statement across the table, watching their faces as they processed the numbers. Jennifer's gasp was audible. $200,000? Harold, we had no idea you had this much money saved. Of course you didn't, I replied. Because if you had known, you would have found a way to steal it too, just like you stole my house and my truck and my dignity. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for months. Michael found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Dad, what are you saying? I pulled out the second document, the new will that Benjamin had prepared with such careful attention to detail. I'm saying that your greed has cost you everything you thought you were going to inherit. This money, along with all my remaining assets, is being donated to charity. You, Michael, will receive exactly what you deserve for betraying your father. Nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's face cycled through shock, anger, and calculation in rapid succession. Michael simply stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. You can't do this, Jennifer finally sputtered. We're your family. We took care of everything for you. We made sure you were safe and provided for. You imprisoned me, I corrected, my voice growing stronger with each word. You stole my life, sold my memories, and abandoned me like garbage. The charity that will receive this money helps elderly people stay in their homes with dignity. They do what real families are supposed to do, protect and honor their elders instead of discarding them. Michael leaned forward, tears starting to form in his eyes. Dad, please. I know we made mistakes, but we can fix this. You can come live with us. We'll take care of you properly. The desperation in his voice might have moved me a month ago, but now it sounded like nothing more than panic at losing money he'd counted on inheriting. Michael, you had your chance to take care of me properly. You chose Jennifer's priorities over your father's welfare. You chose money over honor. Those choices have consequences. I stood up, feeling stronger and more in control than I had since the day they'd driven me away from my home. The papers are already filed. The money is already donated. Your inheritance is gone, and there's nothing you can do to change that. Jennifer jumped to her feet, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. This is insane. You're cutting off your nose to spite your face. Michael is your only child. Who else do you have? I looked at her with the kind of pity usually reserved for people who've lost something precious without understanding its value. I have my dignity, I said simply. I have the satisfaction of knowing that your greed will help other families avoid the pain you've caused me. And I have the peace that comes from making sure bad choices have appropriate consequences. As they gathered their things to leave, Michael turned back one last time. Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. I never wanted it to end like this. Neither did I, son, I replied, and for a moment he looked like the boy I'd raised instead of the stranger he'd become. But this is how it ends when you forget what family really means. 6 months have passed since that confrontation in the conference room, and I can honestly say that I've never felt more at peace with myself or my decisions. The foundation in Sarah's memory has already helped 12 elderly people remain in their homes, providing them with cleaning services, meal delivery, and companionship so they can age with dignity in familiar surroundings. My days at Sunset Manor have taken on a rhythm that I've grown to appreciate. I wake early, just like I did during my working years, and spend the morning reading newspapers and books from the small library. The afternoon activities have introduced me to people I never would have met otherwise, each with their own stories of resilience and adaptation. 3 weeks after our confrontation, I met Evelyn Morrison, a remarkable woman who'd moved into the room next to mine after her apartment became too much to manage. Unlike many of us who'd been deposited here by reluctant relatives, Evelyn had made the choice herself, researching facilities and selecting Sunset Manor because of their activity programs and community garden project. Harold, she said during our first conversation over dinner, I've been watching you since you arrived, and I can tell you're someone who's been through something difficult, but I can also tell you're someone who's made peace with it. Her insight was so accurate it was almost startling. We began taking walks together in the facility's garden, talking about our past lives, our children, our hopes for whatever time we had left. Evelyn had been a teacher for 40 years, and she possessed the kind of wisdom that comes from helping young people navigate difficult transitions. She listened to my story without judgment and helped me understand that my anger toward Michael was justified, but my decision to move beyond it was even more important. You know, she said during one of our evening conversations, forgiveness isn't about pretending that wrong actions were right. It's about refusing to let someone else's poor choices continue to hurt you." Her words resonated in ways I hadn't expected, helping me understand that the peace I was feeling wasn't indifference, but something much more valuable. Michael has called several times since that day in the conference room. The first few calls were angry, desperate attempts to convince me to change my mind about the will. But as weeks passed, his tone shifted toward something that sounded more like genuine remorse. During our most recent conversation, he actually apologized for specific actions rather than offering general statements about mistakes. "Dad, I realize now that we should never have sold your house without talking to you first," he said during a call last week. "I was so focused on what Jennifer and I thought was practical that I forgot to consider how you would feel." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of everything he'd done, but it was progress toward understanding the impact of his choices. "I've chosen to forgive my son, not because his actions were acceptable, but because carrying anger was poisoning my remaining years. However, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or removing consequences. The will remains unchanged, and the foundation continues its work, helping other elderly people avoid the experience I endured. The most unexpected development has been my involvement with the foundation's educational programs. Benjamin arranged for me to speak to community groups about elder abuse and the importance of family communication around aging issues. Sharing my story publicly was difficult at first, but I've discovered that helping others avoid similar betrayals gives my experience meaning I never anticipated. Last month, after one of my presentations to a local church group, a middle-aged woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "my mother has been hinting that she's struggling with daily tasks, but I've been too busy to really listen. Your story made me realize that I need to have an honest conversation with her about what she needs, not what's convenient for me." That conversation made every difficult moment of the past year worthwhile. The truth is, I've learned more about myself in these 6 months at Sunset Manor than I did in the 20 years before Michael's betrayal. I've discovered that independence isn't about where you live or what you own, but about maintaining your dignity and making choices that align with your values. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships, but about people who treat you with respect and genuine care. My friendship with Evelyn has blossomed into something I never expected at this stage of life. We're not romantic partners, but we're companions in the truest sense, supporting each other through the daily challenges of aging, while celebrating the wisdom and perspective that come with experience. She's helped me understand that this chapter of my life doesn't have to be about endings, but can be about new beginnings built on different foundations. Looking back on everything that's happened, I realize that Michael's betrayal, as painful as it was, ultimately freed me from expectations and obligations that were making both of us unhappy. He was struggling under the weight of caring for an aging parent while building his own life, and I was clinging to a relationship that had fundamentally changed. His method of resolving that tension was cruel and dishonest, but the underlying issue was real. The foundation continues to grow, now helping 23 elderly people maintain their independence, while providing education to families about navigating aging issues with dignity and respect for everyone involved. Sarah would be proud to know that our savings, built penny by penny over decades of careful planning, is now ensuring that other couples' life work contributes to community well-being rather than individual greed. Most importantly, I've learned that justice isn't always about punishment, though sometimes consequences are necessary for learning to occur. True justice is about restoring balance, ensuring that people who've worked hard and loved deeply are treated with the respect they've earned. It's about creating systems that support dignity rather than exploitation, and about teaching the next generation that family loyalty is a two-way responsibility. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is letting them face the consequences of their choices. Michael is learning that betraying the people who love you most comes with costs that extend far beyond money. I hope that lesson serves him well in the future, and I hope he becomes the kind of man who would make his mother proud, even if it's too late to change what happened between us. As I sit here tonight, looking out my window at the parking lot that once symbolized abandonment, I see instead a place where new chapters begin. Tomorrow, Evelyn and I are starting a weekly discussion group for other residents who want to share their life stories and learn from each other's experiences. Next month, the foundation is expanding to include a program that matches elderly people with young families, creating intergenerational friendships that benefit everyone involved. I may not have the house where Sarah and I built our life together, but I carry those memories in my heart, where no one can take them away. I may not have the son I thought I was raising, but I have the peace that comes from knowing I did my best with the love and wisdom I possessed at the time. And I may not have the future I once imagined, but I have something perhaps more valuable: the knowledge that even in the face of betrayal and loss, it's possible to create meaning, find community, and build something good from the wreckage of broken dreams. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I hope it's given you something to think about regarding how we treat the people who've invested their lives in loving us. Have you experienced similar family struggles? Or do you worry about how you'll handle aging parents or your own future care needs? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please take a moment to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to hear more stories about life's unexpected challenges and the wisdom that can emerge from even the most difficult experiences. Share this story with someone who might benefit from understanding that dignity and self-respect are worth more than money or convenience. Thank you for listening to An Old Man's Story, and may you find the courage to choose honor over comfort in your own family relationships. Remember, the love we give and the respect we show come back to us in ways we never expect, and sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that cost us everything we thought we wanted.